Hey everyone, it's me, HawkeyeG here. Today's video is going to be an army composition guide for the High Elves. This particular video does assume you have all of the High Elf DLC, so please keep that in mind. It can still give you some ideas of compositions to use even if you don't have any DLC though, and I would like to make a non-DLC version of this video as well. The main goal of this video is to give you some ideas of what units I use at various stages of the game, and what I think some of the best compositions are for various playstyles. So that means I'm going to present compositions for the early game, the mid game, and the late game, and then briefly touch on any units I don't really cover much. Early game being right at the start, mid game being like around the time you get tier 3 or 4, maybe like turns 50 to 100. Late game is once you have like tier 5 access to everything, turn 100, 150 plus. So with that being said, let's jump in and take a look here. So, the first composition I have here is for the early game, right? With your starting army, you're going to have a couple of obscure units, and usually you can use these to your advantage greatly, right? I mean, pretty sure this is what Tyrion starts with. It's not, I don't remember if it's the Phoenix Guard. Anyway, you'll have a couple of strange units, but as you can see, the rest is just spearmen and archers, right? You have your lord, and you just fill with spearmen and archers. You probably want like a 2-to-1 ratio of archers to spearmen, because a few spearmen spread out properly can hold the line against units that outnumber them still, and the archers are going to be dealing the damage, right? The spearmen are just there to hold the line. So this is kind of what your first army is going to look like initially. Once you get towards the end of early game, or generally this kind of army here, this is going to be your goal for the early game, okay? Handful of spearmen, plenty of archers, and then some bolt throwers. And so you can see I have a couple extra spearmen here to be able to try to cover the bolt throwers, so we're not quite a 2-to-1 ratio here, but if you include the bolt throwers, right, then it would be a 2-to-1 ratio. This is probably the first thing, I think for longevity, this is the first thing you want to go for, right? I do have a couple of heroes back here, because you do start the game, this isn't going to help to look at it, but if you look here when you start the game, you will have a capacity for one of each hero at the beginning of the game, okay? You want a noble, and you might want to just build, you might want to make the building for it early, because while this doesn't increase your capacity, if you start with a capacity of 1, you can build this building, buy 1 noble, and then delete it. And the reason you want the noble is for the replenish troops increase, right? Your casualty replenishment rate increase. Especially in the early game, this is going to be something that carries you really far. But you're not going to be able to get every early game army set up with that, right? So that's why I kind of have these off to the side. Same thing with the mage. You can get the mage building here at tier 3. Whoops, we got to go here. And you can unlock the recruitment of a mage, but you won't actually get a capacity increase until you reach tier 4. That's not going to happen in the early game, but you can get a tier 3 smith building with the bolt throwers, and since this is tier 3, you could even put this building in a minor settlement to begin with, just for the sake of unlocking bolt throwers, or really wherever you can fit it, depending on where your start position is. But basically, like, my point is, the heroes are only, in the early game, you're only going to get these heroes into 1 army. You still want them, they're very valuable, they probably go in your main army, but for any other armies, what you want to do is get bolt throwers, right? You can get these in every army. You don't need a hero capacity increase for them. And this is really all you need, is the spearmen and archers. Bolt throwers are going to help you with sieges. They'll be able to take down towers. It'll also force enemies to come to you. That's a big component of artillery, and since with the spearmen and archer, you'll kind of be taking a more defensive posture in the early game as the High Elves, you want the bolt throwers to force your enemies to come to you. Another thing that I really like using bolt throwers for is sniping out enemy artillery, right? They have the alternate modes, right? This is the stats for their single shot, and this is well, it's better to look at it in a battle, but they have the single round fire mode and the multi-round fire mode, right? They can spread shot at infantry, they can single fire at large units and artillery. They're great at sniping artillery, but so basically you use this in the early game to force the enemy to come to you. That's pretty much it, right? There's other things you could build, but this is what you want. I wouldn't really recommend anything else that's like at tier 1 or even really at tier 2, like maybe some eagles, but what you want, like, just for cost effectiveness, spearmen and archers is all you need. So that covers it for early game. Let's move on now to the mid game and look at some of the compositions that I have lined up for that. So first, oh, what's that? It's the exact same composition. Did I make a mistake? No. This is exactly what I wanted. This is the first thing I wanted to show, because this composition is still viable until you get into the late game. You can use spearmen and archers all the way to turn 100 until you're getting like Phoenix Guards, Sisters of Avalorn, and Dragons, right? You can see I did intentionally put the hero units actually in this army this time. Once you're getting into the mid game, you want to be trying to push your hero capacities up. You might still not be quite hitting tier 4 on all of your settlements. You might not have enough room for hero capacity and you just might not be there yet, right? Depending on where you're at with the mid game. But this is the goal, right? This is a good goal for a standard mid game army. Just again, because of the cost effectiveness of these units, and if you do actually have a mage and a noble in the army, that will also help increase their effectiveness pretty intensively. But yeah, there's also the factor of momentum, right? Yes, this army might not be able to beat an opponent's full-sized tier 3 army of 20 units, okay? But a lot of the times what ends up happening is you win one fight with your lord and maybe a backup army, and then your lord just one of your head frontline armies just pushes through their territory with this, and yeah, you might not beat a 1v1 against tier 3 units, but if you keep momentum in your favor, they never get a full army to fight you with anyway. So this composition, it's cost effective, it's strong, and you end up keeping it a lot of the times when momentum's in your favor. The next one here is just a classic, the Lothern Seaguard Doomstack. It's great, right? Again, you see we have the Noble and the Mage. Hopefully you can get those. It's kind of expected. Maybe a Handmaiden to go in there as well, depending on where you're at. But yeah, this is just like baby's first Doomstack or whatever, right? Like having a full set of Lothern Seaguard. This is a Spearman and an Archer combined, right? You don't have to have mastery of advanced tactics. You don't have to have really technical formations, and all you really have to do is protect a couple of bolt throwers, right? You can use this composition. It's just easy, right? This is an easy composition to use, and it's strong. These are strong units. They will shoot arrows at things that come into contact with them to weaken them. They will have a better chance of winning the melee fight because those enemies are weakened, and then they continue shooting the enemy as they run away after losing the fight, right? It's a versatile unit. The one weakness to them, and why I wouldn't necessarily... this is an easy army to use. The problem is that it's cost prohibitive, right? If we look at the base upkeep for archers and spearmen, 118 and 125, shielded Lothern Seaguards run at 212, right? So basically for every one unit of Lothern Seaguards, you could literally have a spearman and an archer. And I would say that 2 armies that look like this are going to beat 1 army that looks like this, right? So just something to keep in mind. But yeah, this is effective still. And if you can afford it, or even if you just aren't as comfortable with different kinds of strategy, this is a great option to use. It's something... It's a bit of a meme, I guess, but yeah, Lothern Seaguard is a very effective unit. It's definitely worth the cost in many ways. The next army here is what I would call kind of my revised standard army, right? If we're into tier 3, you kind of want to mix in some better units. Spearmen and archers will do the job, but if you can upgrade to some more advanced versions of things, that's good too. So you see I put Silver and Guard in here. Some people might argue that they're not worth it. I do think that they are. Okay, if we take a look at the stats here, right, here you have Spearmen, here you have Silver and Guard. You might have to go back and pause on the stats for a second. But basically, they're just an all-around upgrade, right? Enchanted armor, charge defense against all, increased armor, better melee attack, defense, and weapon strength, right? It does come at an increased recruitment cost or upkeep cost, but I don't know. Generally speaking, I find them to be very effective. This is a very powerful unit, and it's just going to do better than Spearmen. And if you're at the point where you can afford to upgrade all your Spearmen to Silver and Guard, you should, right? This is just an overall upgrade. Oops, we're one army ahead there, sorry. I put Shadow Warriors in here. This one is kind of debatable for me. These are definitely an upgrade to the Archer. I mean, you can see here from the stats, right? Clear upgrade to the Archer in virtually every way. The only problem, the main issue that I have with these is that their formation is weird. They have like that spread formation instead of a tight formation, which means if you're trying to do some like spear wall formations with archers behind, these might not always fit the way you want them to, or you might have to overlap them or do something weird. So they can kind of be weird to get them to fit in. But you can see, like, not that you really want your archers to be in melee, but they have better health, better melee stats and everything, the better armor. Like, Shadow Warriors are a good unit and can certainly replace your archers. They will do more damage. It looks like they have less ammunition, but that might just be a ranking thing. But yeah, other than that, their stats are overall better, right? I did put some Lothern Seaguard in here, and I do have some archers, right? So what I do is I put the Silverin Guard at the front, Shadow Warriors in the middle, and then the Lothern Seaguard on the flanks and in the rear, right? So you can do like 2 archers in between each Lothern Seaguard, right? So that you kind of have your flanks protected, but you still have archers. And again, these are just like, again, if we look at the cost here, yes, Shadow Warriors are a straight upgrade. I do think they're a good unit, but they're also basically twice as expensive as archers. Kind of the same story as Lothern Seaguard, right? Kind of the same story with the Silverin Guard. These are good units, but they are like, you can field a wider number of armies with just spearmen and archers. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. If what you need is a lot of armies to cover a wider range of territory, you might want to go more spearmen and archers. Keep in mind the supply lines penalty, though, because the more armies you make, the more expensive things will get, which does mean that your Silverin Guard, Shadow Warrior, Lothern Seaguard, that stuff will be more cost effective as the number of armies that you have goes up, and that will be more true the higher difficulty that you play on. So just a few things to keep in mind. But yeah, this is just kind of an example. I'm not saying you should use specifically this distribution of units, but these are the kind of units I would put in what I would say a revised standard army, and try to find a balance of them that works for you. So let's look at, there's a couple other what I would call deviations from the norm. So here you can see I've taken Silverin Guard, I've just kept some archers, but what I've chosen for another tier 3 building to kind of to give like a varied build, right? When we're getting into the mid game, what you want to do is find something that can give you an advantage, right? You want to go with a building that's going to give you some kind of unit that you can use against your opponent to push an advantage, right? You're not going to use these kinds of units in the late game. You're not going to use these kinds of units in the late game. You might not even use some of this stuff in the late game, right? So, or especially like this, right? So that's what the mid game is about finding something you can add on to your army that gives you an advantage against whoever you're facing. I've added cavalry to this army. Otherwise, it's pretty standard. I've kind of taken archers instead of Shadow Warriors because they're going to be cheaper when the cavalry is expensive. You would take cavalry to fight against more artillery and missile heavy units, right? The number one example of this would be the Skaven, right? If you are playing a High Elf campaign that has to fight against Skaven, I'm going to definitely recommend some cavalry for it, because that's going to be, like I've talked about using bolt throwers to snipe out artillery. I still do it, but if you can get some cavalry to harass their archers, harass their backline, if you can get one unit of cavalry on their artillery, that artillery is dead, right? And so like Skaven could be useful against dwarves or the Empire, but they do have gunpowder weapons, so they're gonna do a lot of damage to your cavalry. The Vampire Coast is another really good opponent to use cavalry on. I don't know that I'd use it in mirror matchups like the High Elves against other High Elves or Dark Elves, because using your cavalry to fight against spearmen and archers probably isn't going to work out very well. But so this is just an example, right? It's just a slight deviation. You get the cavalry building and you throw some silver helms in there. They'll definitely do some work, especially against, like I said, like civilizations with weaker melee troops and more like focus on artillery and backline. Next one I have, some people might have some concerns about it. I know all about the white lines of crap meme. But this is the army that I would recommend in your mirror matchups, right? So you still have your kind of default, the Silverin Guard and the Archers, right? The standard units. But you put some white lines of Trace in here and some Great Eagles. What are the white lines of Trace in here for? These are damage dealers and they're armor piercing, right? This is a tier 3 armor piercing unit, right? You don't get armor piercing on your like missiles unless we're getting to Sisters of Avalorn. Now I'm playing as the Avalorn faction, as Alariel, right? So this is at tier 3. Any other faction, this is a tier 4 unit, so it can be kind of misleading, right? This campaign would be an exception where this you could get armor piercing, but yeah, anything else, like technically your bolt throwers are armor piercing, but you're not going to build a bunch of bolt, like I guess you could do a bunch of bolt throwers, but my point is, like, this is what beats spearmen and archers, right? This is the unit that beats that. This is going to shred spearmen, and the archers are not going to do a lot of damage because of their high armor value, right? They don't have shields, which there is that, but like they're still pretty good, right? They've still got this missile resistance because of the Lion Cloak. So I definitely think that, like, and even against the Dark Elves, they do have armor piercing, but still these are going to be good like melee counter units, right? The Great Eagles then are kind of your all-purpose unit, right? It's a flying unit, right? That's why you get these, because they're flying units. Flying units are great against lots of factions, especially factions that don't have flying units. This can be used to harass their artillery. This can be used to harass their archer line. This can be used to harass their front line while your spearmen are holding the line and your white lines of Trace are getting some nice flanks in, right? This can be used to chase down like enemy mage heroes or enemy like assassin heroes, right? Enemy ranged heroes. You can see the charge bonus on these things is just massive. So I do think that this is an army composition that has a lot of value. Like I said, especially for mirror matchups against your High Elves, Dark Elves, and the Lizardmen, this is going to be very effective for you to use, okay? The last one I want to show is basically what I think you should be aiming for towards the end of the mid game, right? This is going to require multiple tier 4 settlements with a variety of buildings, so you won't be able to get all of this from a single province. But from everything we've looked at, right, these are all kind of like transitional armies, right? This is going to be at the end of mid game when you're still trying to push to tier 5, because there is that awkward gap between tier 3 and tier 4 where you need an extra point of growth, right? You need 2 growth to get to tier 3. You need 4 growth to get to tier 4 on your settlement building. And so as a result, it takes, plus because of the exponential scaling of the amount of growth required to get that growth point, it takes a lot longer to get to tier 4 than it does to tier 3. But once you get there, this is the kind of army I'd go for, right? Great Eagles are nice, but they're definitely not as strong or as versatile as Phoenix units, okay? Shadow Warriors are nice. Archers are like okay, but if you have the DLC, this is like the best unit in your roster for the High Elves. You want to go to the Sisters of Avalorn kind of as soon as you can get the chance, right? If we're talking about priority of tier 4 buildings here, like this, well, normally it would be the Grove building, and you would have the Sisters of Avalorn like up here at the top on tier 4 of the growth building. This, again, just like I said with the bolt throwers in the early game, this is probably what you want to focus on for like the end of your mid game. The first thing you want to do is build up that Grove building to reach tier 4 on it and get Sisters of Avalorn. You're probably going to want Phoenix Guard later on in the game. At least I think you should want these. So you're going to get the Phoenixes at some point. And then hero buildings like being able to get the Lore Masters, being able to get the Handmaidens. The Handmaidens would come along with the Sisters of Avalorn. At tier 4, you're getting more hero unlocks. You do want your hero buildings in every province, but basically, like, hopefully the rest of this is self-explanatory, right? You got a handful of spearmen to hold the line. You've got your like high quality archers, still a couple flying units, a couple artillery to force them to bring the fight to you, and then heroes for a variety of purpose. You can add or subtract heroes as you find it necessary, but this is kind of what I would say is your goal towards the end of the late game, right? Or sorry, towards the end of the mid game. With that, we'll move into the late game units. Now, this composition I'm showing you, I don't know if I'd actually really recommend this. This is what I use a lot of the time. This is kind of my personal balanced army. It's really not the best army in the world. However, this is more of something I'm using as a baseline, right? So I can give you different examples to kind of deviate from the norm. Again, I like to stack a full set of heroes in my army, but you might not necessarily want that. There's some that you might not find very useful or you might not get good use out of. Nobles and mages are probably the most important, but I do like lore masters and handmaiden because they're pretty versatile as well. I put a couple Phoenix Guard in there, so these basically hold the line alongside your heroes, and then the Sisters of Avalorn do damage. Dragons can be used for artillery hunting, they can be used for getting good flanks and charges, they're good for hero hunting, and they have the dragon breath that can be used to help clear dangerous units off the Phoenix Guard, and then of course again, the bolt throwers to force the enemy to come towards you. So that's like I said, that's kind of my standard composition. What I actually think a better standard composition looks like in the late game is something like this, right? With this noble, he's going to be, I don't have the skills upgraded, but you put this guy on an eagle, you put your lord on a dragon, and now, especially if you have a fire mage, you can put that on a dragon too. Even without that, your mage and your handmaiden can go on horses, right? I would put them on a steed otherwise if you don't have the dragon option for the mage. And so you can kind of use them as a little bit of harassment. You then have dragons and arcane phoenixes, and if you notice, the dragons have the siege attacker requirement. So I think in the late game you don't always need the bolt throwers, right? It would be nice still for this composition to have something to lure the enemy towards you, and maybe that's something you want, is to just keep one bolt thrower to force their approach. But by this phase in the game, most of your enemies are going to be bringing artillery, and I think that you're better off just trying to push up against them and shut down their artillery, and just take them on directly, than you are trying to bait them out with your artillery or fighting them with your bolt throwers. This army is also going to work great on sieges because you have a couple flying units that can go right up to the walls, get some heavy attacks off, your lord on the dragon, hopefully a high level spellcaster, and you can just get some damage done right away. You don't really need to sit back with your bolt throwers at this phase of the game. So this is kind of an example of what I'd say is like a good, balanced, late game high elf army. I do have a few more to look at here, and these are kind of my considerations for more specialized or focused armies for late game, some kind of fun compositions that you could use, things that will shake up the standard and give you an idea of what to do to deviate from this. First one may not really be a deviation, but this is kind of your Sisters of Avalorn Doom stack, right? If you really wanted to, you could have just a full set of 19 Sisters and a Lord. I do put the bolt thrower in this army because in this case you probably do want to force the enemy to come to you and get in range of your archers. Every advantage you can gain over every melee troop they have will be good, even though Sisters do have good melee stats. I have a couple of dragons as well. Again, these would be good for artillery hunting or just to be able to, for lord sniping, right? These have high charge bonus, high single target damage, which your Sisters can hit single targets pretty well. But as opposed to this, engaging it in melee, right? And again, the breath ability to be able to clear off your front lines. I put a couple heroes in here as optional. And I actually don't have a mage here. I do think that like a light mage would be good. Generally having a mage in any army is good. You might want to put a light mage in here because then you can pin things down with the Net of Amontok. But generally you just have so many different, you have fire, magic, and armor piercing damage on every one of these units, and that's why I left these out of the army, because kind of theoretically, you don't need heroes in this army. You might not even want, a hero just takes up a space that could be occupied by a Sister of Avalorn, right? You could put a noble in for the troop replenishment, but again, theoretically, you're not really taking losses with this army, right? You're using up your missiles instead of using up your troop health in melee, right? You're killing everything before it gets to you. You could have like a handmaiden or the noble or the lore master. Lore master has some good like buffs and debuffs, but they won't really apply to your sisters. Anyway, I don't want to, I guess I don't want to dwell on this too long. You can use some heroes as like frontline bait, right? Having heroes to pin things down in the front while your archers decimate it is a great option. But you just have to ask yourself, like, do I want a hero or do I just want another sister, right? So this is one option. Another option is the flying, like the monstrous doom stack, right? You can see here I have all manner of dragons and phoenixes. You probably want to kind of be more selective, like having 3 different types of dragons and 3 different types of phoenixes probably isn't the best bet, right? It's going to be a lot of different abilities to try to micromanage. I do like the frost phoenixes though, because they have this AoE debuff, right? So this is just going to help with all of the other combat that you get into. And since this army is going to fight pretty clustered up, like you're going to want these units to fight together, you're going to probably at least want the Frostheart Phoenixes. The Arcane Phoenixes are great. They're very strong. And then you just pull in whatever kind of dragons you want. The dragons do all have pretty similar abilities. You'll notice that I put a couple Dragon Princes in here as well. Kind of just because it's like good to have like a little bit of variety as an option. But in theory, what happens is you get a lot of enemy units pinned down with your phoenixes and your dragons, and then your dragon princes can absolutely destroy those. Like you're going to have infantry blobs around your units, and the dragon princes can just come in and destroy them. Otherwise, they might even just be better for chasing stuff down. Yeah, the arcane phoenixes. Your phoenixes are fast, but your dragons, well, the dragon phoenixes or dragon princes aren't that much faster. And then you still have some heroes. Having some healing is good. Having some buffs is going to be good. And then the casualty replenishment, like depending on how well your healing management goes, you might want that as well. But so this is just kind of an idea of like, and you can see, right, compared to even like the Sisters of Avalorn army, this is going to be a much more expensive army, but this is also going to be very dangerous and threatening and do some serious damage. Another army you can go with in the late game is an infantry-focused comp. Now, I say infantry-focused, but I've stacked a lot of heroes in here. I mean, technically heroes can be considered infantry too. And I have dragon princes in here because you still kind of want that hammer and anvil effect, right? You want to kind of be able to flank heavily with the dragon princes while you're getting your melee infantry into the lines. You also have the eagle bolt, like you have the bolt throwers so that you can pull the enemy towards you because you're going to want that for your infantry, right? But if we're looking at like the building browser here, like you can see, like this is like these are high tier units, tier 5 infantry and tier 4 infantry. And so if that's your playstyle, if you just want to move out with a bunch of foot soldiers and slash things to bits, like this is going to be your option, right? You could, if you don't think you'll use cavalry, eliminate them and just stack some more infantry. If you would rather put some dragons in here, there's nothing wrong with that either. But just in general, being able to kind of push your opponents with the infantry, like these are going to be very strong infantry units. Swordsmasters of Hoeth don't necessarily have the best survivability, but being able to just push, this is one of those kinds of armies where you're going to take damage on the approach, but once you actually hit them, you're going to be able to push through them very quickly. This is going to work really great for you on sieges without like a bunch of putzing around as well, right? Like you take some Sisters of Avalorn and you're sitting back trying to snipe out units on the towers that are hiding behind sections of the walls or broken towers. You might need to bring like an extra bolt thrower in so that you can have 2 bolt throwers to snipe out 2 towers. Like this is just, if you have a full line of infantry, you just click them all up on the walls and you walk over everything. So it's a little bit easier to use. Obviously, it has some downsides. It's going to be weak to like faster units. It's going to be weak to cavalry. Well, hopefully not too weak to cavalry with the Phoenix Guard, but especially like missile units. And it's going to take a lot of damage from artillery on the way in. But just another option, right? The last option I'm going to present, and I think this is going to be the wackiest one, is going to be your cavalry and chariot focused army. you really only have the one high tier cavalry unit, and that is the Dragon Princes. But you do have some tier 4 cavalry that can be pretty good, right? You've got these lion chariots that they added with Eltharion, and these things are pretty good. I mean, they have really solid stats, right? You've got the Tyrannok chariots as well if you want them to have that added missile damage, like magical missiles with high damage. I feel like it looks better than it is. Out of all of these, like, you know, optional armies, this is pretty much the only one I don't use because it's not really my style. And a lot of the stats on these can be kind of deceiving, especially the missile damage on these chariots. Like, that looks great, but a lot of the times you're just overkilling infantry, or you're missing, right? Or you're having it blocked by a shield. So, but yeah, so I put some cavalry in here. I did kind of add some other things in, as you can see, right? I've got the phoenixes, but again, the idea here is the same as with the Dragon Princes in this army. You've got these phoenixes to pin things down and to reduce their stats, right? Reduce their ability to counterattack. The phoenixes are there as a mobile debuff. So you land the phoenixes first, get a few things pinned down, and then you can have the Dragon Princes charge the mobs that are surrounding the phoenixes for maximum damage. You can have the chariots either running around and disrupting enemy backlines, preventing their archers from getting too many shots off on your various cavalry units, or you can just have these cycle charge in as well. I have a couple Phoenix Guard come with as an anti-large option, because that's really the main thing that you're going to be missing here with this kind of army is anti-large. So we've got a couple Phoenix Guard for that, and because I couldn't really find a good spot for them elsewhere, I've included some War Lions of Shrace. These would be good because these, yeah, you know, honestly, their speed kind of sucks. Yeah, they're maybe better for the early game, but, well, the reason that you bring some of these is because they're fast, they're fairly versatile, and these are what you use to once things are running off the battlefield, right? These are a little more disposable. So instead of having your, like, Dragon Princes or Lion Chariots chase something off the battlefield, you have the War Lions do it, and they're fast, and like War Beasts in general, because of their, like, model size, speed, and animation, are going to absolutely shred any unit that's retreating off the battlefield. I'm surprised that their speed is what it is, but like compared to like a Phoenix, sure, the Phoenix looks like it's faster, but if you've ever played out a battle and had like a Phoenix try to chase an enemy infantry regiment off the battlefield, it's terrible. It gets very few hits in, it circles around it for 5 minutes. It's annoying. So yeah, this is like your cavalry slash chariot option, right? You have infantry, you have like monstrous flying units, and then you have your high level archers. So those are what I would consider some of your options in the late game. In general, those are your various options for armies. I hope that was instructive to you. Like I said, there's kind of a natural flow here, and you can see that like you do kind of end up back at the same place that you started as you go through, right? Bolt throwers are like, that's like a personal preference question. The reason I keep them in this kind of army is because they are great artillery snipers even into the late game. They're just maybe not as effective, or trying to snipe artillery isn't quite as useful and can be done with other units once you hit the late game. But yeah, those are my recommendations and some like ideas and theory crafting for different army compositions for the High Elves in the early game, the mid game, and the late game. Now, the last thing I do want to talk about quick that I said I would touch on is the units that I haven't really included, right? And that would be, well, I'm just gonna go through them one by one. First one is the Rangers, right? I don't really find these to be useful. They're just too weak and die too easily. Some people do like them. Some people have found them useful, but in the early game, the archer, like your archers are your damage dealer. It's not supposed to be the Rangers. You put the spearmen up in the front line for defense, and they take less damage than the Rangers. Like the spearmen are your holding unit, the archers are your damage unit. The Rangers are not supposed to be a holding unit. They're supposed to be a damage unit, but you're better off with archers, in my opinion. You also have archers with light armor, and at one point in this video I was gonna include them in some of my mid-game armies, because they're like, I want to say their melee defense only. Yeah, their melee defense increases, their armor increases, but if you look at the kinds of enemy units that you're going to be fighting into like the mid game, by tier 3 or tier 4, a lot of your enemies are going to have like some kind of armor piercing missile. Like the question you have to ask yourself is what is the purpose of this unit and who do you use it against, right? The armor helps you against other archers, right? This is like a counter to enemy archers where you're going to take less damage from their arrows, but there's just not enough, like, I don't think that it's that useful. It's a slight cost increase, and I'm not saying that I've never used them before, but yeah, I just had a hard time, like if we go back and look at like in the mid game, right? If that's it, sure, you can access it in the early game, but that's taking up a valuable slot at tier 1 that could be growth or income or public order, which you'd rather have, right? If we're looking at something like this, like, wouldn't you'd rather take shadow warriors over archers with light armor, and if you're at tier 1, you'd rather not have that building at all, right? And that's kind of like, and we were talking about like mirror matchup, right? What happens if you're fighting other high elves and dark elves? Well, dark elves have armor piercing arrows, and high elves do have the Sisters of Avalorn, which the AI will no doubtedly bring to battle. But if you're fighting them, like in the mid game, this is kind of what you want, right? You want to spare that little bit of extra currency to have some different kinds of counters, right? You want to counter them more directly instead of just like, well, my archers have armor on them now. I have found other people's arguments that these aren't exactly cost effective, or it's just not that useful, right? So archers light armor, I don't think they're useful, or probably just pass on them. Well, whatever, make your own decision. That's what I think about them. Lothern Seaguard without shield, this is just pointless to me. Like, why would you not get the shield, like a silver shield, for a little bit of a cost? I mean, I guess, but again, if you're gonna go Lothern Seaguard, I don't think that there's a lot of value in taking like this like you stick with Spearman and Archer until you're ready to convert to Lothern Seaguard with shields and really go ham, right? This is just it. I think that that's worth it. I don't really see much use in these. Like, shields are great. End of story. Yeah, I didn't put Illyrian Reavers in any of my armies because they're just too weak. Like what enemy are you fighting at tier 2 that this Illyrian Reaver shock cavalry is really going to be effective against? The only thing I'd really use these for is chasing units off the battlefield. But if that's what you're doing, why don't you just put like another archer unit in that army instead? Let them get shot while they run away. Let them get shot while they come back to fight. Like, these units are just too weak. Illyrian Reavers are just too weak. They take damage too easily. I don't use them. Illyrian Reaver archers, Cav archers can be a very useful unit, but to me their damage output is too low, right? They have the same missile strength as regular archers, but they are like 2/3 of the size in terms of unit count, right? So you're sacrificing a good bit of damage for that like speed and maneuverability. I want to say they have less ammunition. Yeah, they have 6 less ammunition as well. And so that's really going to hurt you on battles where ammunition does count. While it's not every fight, it's still some fights. And yeah, I wouldn't say never use these, but I wouldn't like recommend sticking with these for any extended period of time. We also had the Silver Helms with no shields. Like, just get the Silver Helms with shields. They're cavalry, like they're going to get shot by archers. You want the shields, right? I didn't put War Lions in a lot of my... I mean, we had mid-game composition with Grove building, and I didn't put War Lions in there. Maybe they should go in that army that has the White Lions of Shrace and the Great Eagle. To be honest, I just don't use these that much. I don't think that they're a bad unit. I think that they are a good unit. I've had lots of people... like, I've seen people explain how to use them effectively, and... just because, like, for my personal playstyle, I don't find myself using these. That's why you don't see them pop up. I just wanted to touch on it. The same thing is true for chariots, right? Whether or not chariots are good, I think, is a different question. I think it's more of like a playstyle and personality question. I don't like using chariots in single player campaign. I don't find them to be especially effective, but I don't find them to be terrible. Like, One of the advantages chariots have over standard cavalry is if you only have 3 units, it's a lot easier to get them in and out of a fight instead of getting them, like having 2 units get perpetually stuck in an infantry blob and your entire unit turns back around to run towards that blob because 2 units of dragon princes are stuck in it. So chariots are definitely strong, definitely have their place. If you're looking for some kind of like flanker, these are a good option. Again, it's just not my play style that uses them very frequently. And then the last one is like, I have a question mark by dragon princes because by all means, these units should be good. They look strong. They have good stats. I just find them to not be the most effective piece of the High Elf arsenal. Like you can just do Phoenix Guard and Sisters of Avalorn. You don't need the Dragon Princes for like the Hammer and Anvil. If you're going with a full infantry build, they are useful, but I don't often go with an infantry build. And on the other hand, you also have like Phoenixes and Dragons. They're not going to serve the exact same purposes as these, but yeah, I just in general in the late game when you can get Dragon Princes with the kind of enemies that you go up against and the kind of units and answers that they have to Dragon Princes, I just don't find this unit to be that useful. I did still put it in a lot of my armies because there's like a lot of different ways that you can utilize them correctly, right? But that being said, that's why I put a question mark next to him. I wanted to just touch on that. It's maybe not my favorite unit of all time, or its effectiveness in the late game with the other options you have available to you are perhaps questionable. With that being said, I have covered everything that I wanted to in this video. I've shown you a variety of army options and selections. I hope that some of that makes sense to you. Of course, I would love to hear your comments and feedback in the comments section. I am not the end-all be-all of like Warhammer, like Total War Warhammer 2 strategy. I've been making a lot of guides on the High Elves, but that still doesn't mean I'm the master of them. And of course, like, different things will work better at different play styles. Maybe just some adjustments on saying like get rid of this or that unit. Like I look forward to a healthy and productive conversation with all of you in the comment section below. I would be happy to have more feedback on some of these compositions and get some other people's ideas of what they do that works for them. And especially because different difficulties have things that operate differently. So some of these compositions you're not even going to consider if you're playing on very hard battle. But with that being said, thank you all for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we will see you next time.